They say blood is thicker than water, but greed evaporates both. When a Silver Spoon executive tried pinning his theft of millions of dollars on me, my own father told me to take the fall. He thought I was just a lowly data analyst who would quietly resign. They had no idea my boring desk job was a classified Department of Defense operation. I do not surrender. I conquer. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now let's begin the story. My name is Emery Rivera. I am 38 years old, and as I sat in the freezing conference room on the 40th floor of Vertex Horizon Dynamics, I realized I was about to become the perfect corporate sacrifice. The air conditioning in the glass-walled executive suite always ran 10 degrees too cold. It was deliberately designed to keep people awake, to keep them constantly on edge. But today the chill felt distinctly personal. Vertex Horizon was not just another mundane tech firm, it was a titan in government contracting, securing defense projects and holding security clearance levels that most of the public did not even know existed. Inside this soundproof glass box suspended high above the city skyline, careers were routinely made broken or quietly executed in absolute silence. I sat perfectly still in the heavy ergonomic leather chair, my hands folded neatly and calmly on the polished mahogany table. Across from me paced Vance Sterling. He was 28 years old, newly minted as vice president, and the arrogant son of the company's majority shareholder. He wore a custom-tailored Italian suit that easily cost more than my supposed annual salary, but no amount of expensive silk could hide the nervous, predatory energy vibrating underneath his skin. "It is incredibly disappointing, Emery," Vance said abruptly, stopping at the head of the table. He leaned forward, planting both hands flat on the pristine wood to loom over me. "This is a catastrophic breach of trust. A batch of our next-generation data storage microchips has vanished from the secure vault. These components contain highly sensitive proprietary architecture meant exclusively for the Department of Defense. We are talking about a physical asset worth tens of millions of dollars." He reached inside his jacket, pulled out a thick manila folder, and threw it onto the table. It slid across the smooth surface and stopped exactly an inch from my folded hands. It was a highly theatrical move, heavily rehearsed and meticulously calculated. "Go ahead and open it," Vance demanded, his voice thick with fake rehearsed outrage. "The evidence is completely undeniable." I did not touch the folder. I already knew exactly what was inside. Vance had spent the last 6 months carefully forging a massive paper trail. Inside that folder were printed emails bearing my exact digital signature authorizing the blind transfer of the chips. There were warehouse exit logs showing my employee identification badge swiping into the high-security sector at 2 o'clock in the morning on Ayao. Sunday. He had successfully mirrored my routing address, replicated my daily keystroke patterns, and built an ironclad narrative that pointed the finger entirely at me. It was a genuinely impressive piece of frame-up engineering for someone I generally considered to be an absolute idiot. Sitting quietly next to Vance was the Director of Human Resources. She was a stern woman who looked at me not with anger, but with the cold, sterile gaze of a professional exterminator. She pushed a single sheet of paper toward me, followed by a sleek black luxury pen. "This is an ultimatum, Ms. Rivera," the HR director said, her tone completely devoid of any human emotion. "Vertex Horizon is offering you an easy way out. If you sign this written confession hand in your immediate resignation and sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, the company will handle this matter internally. We will terminate your employment today, but we will not involve federal authorities. We will not press charges for corporate embezzlement. You will simply walk away quietly." "And if I refuse?" I asked, my voice steady, flat, and completely level. Vance scoffed loudly, crossing his arms over his chest in a display of supreme confidence. "If you refuse, We call the federal authorities right now. You will be arrested in this very room. You will face up to 20 years in federal prison for corporate espionage and grand larceny. It is your choice, Emery. Take the grace we are generously offering or lose your entire life. I kept my face entirely blank, staring directly into Vance's eyes. I saw the desperate, greedy glimmer dancing in his pupils. He was absolutely thrilled. He truly thought he had won. He thought I was just a disposable mid-level data analyst who would panic cry and blindly sign the paper to avoid going to jail. But I knew the reality of the situation. Those microchips were not missing. They had never been lost. Vance had personally smuggled them out of the secure facility 3 weeks ago. He had sold them on the black market to an international syndicate because he had accumulated over $4 million in gambling debts during a disastrous weekend in Las Vegas. He desperately needed a scapegoat to balance the books before the quarterly audit, and I was the perfect invisible target. I slowly unclasped my hands. I placed my palms flat on the edge of the table, taking a slow, deep breath. I was entirely done playing the role of the quiet, obedient employee. I was ready to dismantle his pathetic illusion, to tear down the fabricated evidence line by line, and watch the arrogant color drain completely from his privileged face. I opened my mouth to speak. But before a single syllable could leave my lips, the heavy oak door of the conference room swung open with a violent, echoing thud. I turned my head. Standing in the doorway was my father, Arthur Rivera. He was a prominent, highly respected member of the corporate advisory board and the lifelong best friend of Vance's father. His expensive silk tie was slightly askew, and his face was flushed crimson with a blinding volcanic rage. He did not look at Vance. He did not look at the HR director. His furious, condemning eyes locked entirely on me. Arthur Rivera did not even glance at the meticulously forged documents scattered across the table. He marched straight toward me, his heavy leather shoes striking the floorboards like the pounding of a gavel. For my entire life, I had looked up to this man, hoping to find just a fraction of paternal warmth hidden behind his tailored suits and corporate accolades. Today there was nothing but disgust. "Arthur, I was just explaining to your daughter the gravity of her situation," Vance said, his voice suddenly dripping with a sickeningly respectful tone. My father held up a hand, silencing the vice president. He leaned over the table, bringing his face dangerously close to mine. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" he hissed, his voice vibrating with suppressed fury. "You have completely disgraced this family. The Sterling family and the Rivera family have built a partnership over 30 years. We have moved mountains together, and you, in your infinite arrogance and incompetence, decide to bite the hand that feeds us all to make a quick buck." I looked at him, feeling a sharp physical ache in the center of my chest. He had convicted me before I even had the chance to speak a single word. "Dad, listen to me." I started, keeping my tone measured. "The evidence is completely fabricated. If you look at the server latency logs, it is physically impossible for my credentials to be used at the warehouse while my internet protocol address was pinging from my home router at 2 o'clock in the morning. The digital signature was cleanly spoofed. There is a massive systemic vulnerability that someone is exploiting. I was giving him the facts. I was offering him the truth on a silver platter. "Enough!" Arthur snapped, slamming his palm violently against the mahogany wood. "I do not want to hear your technical excuses. I do not care about routers or server logs. What I care about is the fact that Vance has generously offered you a way out of a federal prison sentence. So you are going to swallow your pride, you are going to look him in the eye, and you will just apologize and move on. Just apologize and move on." The words hung in the freezing air of the conference room, heavy and suffocating. It was the absolute breaking point. It was the exact moment the final fragile thread holding my childhood illusions together snapped entirely. All my life, my father had measured my worth by the weight of my bank account and the prestige of my title. When I turned down a highly lucrative executive track at a Wall Street investment firm to take what he believed was a dead-end, low-level data analyst position, he stopped looking at me as a daughter. He started looking at me as a failed investment. I was the black sheep, the ungrateful child who chose a life of obscurity instead of standing shoulder to shoulder with the corporate elite. He had always been ashamed of me. But I never thought his shame would run so deep that he would willingly serve me up to be slaughtered just to protect his position on the advisory. Bored and his weekend golf games with the sterling patriarch. Vance stepped forward, sensing his absolute victory. He adjusted his silk tie, attempting to look magnanimous and deeply forgiving. Listen to your father, Emery. Arthur is a wise man. I take no pleasure in destroying your life. I am willing to let bygones be bygones. All I require is a formal public apology from you at the executive board meeting tomorrow morning at exactly 10 o'clock. You stand up, you admit your lapse in judgment to the shareholders, you hand in your resignation, and I will personally ensure this entire ugly mess is buried forever. I slowly shifted my gaze from Vance's smug, punchable face to my father. Arthur was nodding emphatically, silently, urging me to surrender. He did not care about my innocence. He did not care about the truth or the fact that the man standing next to him had stolen tens of millions of dollars. My father only cared about maintaining the polished veneer of his social circles. The profound, suffocating disappointment I felt suddenly crystallized. The agonizing pain of betrayal evaporated, leaving nothing behind but absolute freezing clarity. The daughter Arthur Rivera had come to scold was dead. I smiled. It was a small, chilling upward curve of my lips that did not reach my eyes. I stood up from the heavy leather chair. With deliberate, measured movements, I reached down and calmly buttoned the front of my black suit jacket. I smoothed out the invisible wrinkles in the fabric, completely ignoring the written confessions still resting on the table. I will not be signing anything, I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or hesitation, and I certainly will not be apologizing for a crime I did not commit. My father's eyes widened in genuine shock. Emery, you sit back down this instant, he roared, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. I picked up my briefcase, looking past him as if he were nothing more than an empty chair. I turned my attention to the young vice president, who was now staring at me with a mixture of confusion and rising panic. I will see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, Vance, I stated with absolute finality. Without waiting for a response, I turned on my heel and walked toward the heavy oak doors. I pushed them open and stepped out into the bustling hallway. Behind me, my father was screaming my name, his voice echoing off the glass walls, while Vance stood frozen in angry disbelief. I did not look back. I simply walked toward the elevators, my mind already locking onto the mission ahead. The sun had completely set by the time I returned to my downtown apartment. The city lights cast long, sharp shadows across the hardwood floor, but I did not bother turning on the overhead lamps. There was no time for domestic comforts, and certainly no room for the emotional fallout of my father's betrayal. Tears were a luxury afforded to those who did not have a mission to complete. I had a job to do, and the operational parameters had just shifted from passive corporate surveillance to active tactical containment. I walked past the dark kitchen and went straight to the built-in mahogany bookshelf lining the far wall of my living room. Reaching behind a row of thick leather-bound encyclopedias, I pressed my thumb against a hidden biometric scanner. A quiet mechanical click echoed through the silent room as a seamless section of the shelving unit slid open, revealing a reinforced steel wall safe. I inputted a 16-digit alphanumeric passcode, unlocked the heavy door, and pulled out a matte black military-grade encrypted laptop. For 15 years, the world believed I was nothing more than a mid-level data analyst. They saw a quiet, unassuming woman who kept her head down, crunched numbers, and accepted mediocre corporate bonuses without a single complaint. That was precisely the illusion the Pentagon needed them to see. I was not a corporate drone. I was a lieutenant colonel in the United States Cyber Command. I had been deeply embedded within Vertex Horizon Dynamics for the past 24 months to personally monitor and secure a highly classified top-secret defense initiative funded directly by the Department of Defense. I sat down at my glass dining table and flipped the heavy laptop open. The screen flared to life, casting a cold, pale blue glow over my face. I bypassed the standard commercial internet providers, entirely routing my connection directly through a secure military satellite uplink. My fingers moved across the keyboard with rapid, calculated precision, a stark contrast to the slow, deliberate typing I purposely feigned at the office. Vance Sterling truly believed he was a criminal mastermind. He thought he had exploited a blind spot in the inventory management system to steal those next-generation storage microchips. What the arrogant young vice president did not know was that I had anticipated a physical breach months ago. 3 weeks before Vance ever bypassed the vault security, I had personally injected microscopic, undetectable tracking transmitters into the silicon architecture of every single chip in that designated batch. I accessed the Global Positioning Satellite System and executed the command line to wake the remote trackers from their dormant state. A heavily encrypted digital map materialized on my screen, glowing with intricate grid lines. For a few tense seconds, the system searched the regional network. Then a dense cluster of crimson dots began pulsing steadily on the display. I rapidly cross-referenced the geographic coordinates. The stolen shipment was not scattered across the city. The entire batch was sitting inside a fortified storage container at a private, unregulated shipping dock right on the edge of the eastern harbor. I pulled up the maritime logs and Port Authority manifests for that specific sector. The container was scheduled to be loaded onto a commercial freighter at exactly 5 o'clock in the morning, bound for international waters. But it was the buyer's profile that escalated the situation from a corporate crisis to a critical matter of national security. I hacked into the encrypted communication relays surrounding the private dock. The men guarding the container were not simple black market thieves looking for a quick payday. The digital signatures on their communication devices matched known operatives for a hostile international technology smuggling syndicate. This specific group specialized in acquiring and selling advanced military assets to hostile foreign adversaries. By brokering this deal to pay off his pathetic casino debts, Vance had crossed a fatal, irreversible line. He was no longer just committing grand larceny or corporate embezzlement. He was actively committing high treason against the United States of America. I picked up my secure satellite phone and dialed a restricted unlisted number. It rang exactly once before a familiar authoritative voice answered on the other end. "Report," the voice commanded. "The net has dropped," I stated firmly. My tone strictly professional and devoid of any hesitation. "The prey has taken the bait, and the asset is currently localized at the eastern harbor. We are no longer dealing with simple theft. We have confirmed espionage and treason. Send the cleaning crew." "Understood, Lieutenant Colonel. We are mobilizing immediately." The secure line went dead. At exactly midnight, my personal cell phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a single long voicemail from my father. I played the audio message on speaker mode in the empty apartment. His voice was strained, caught somewhere between desperate pleading and dictatorial rage. He told me that if I did not walk into that boardroom tomorrow morning, bow my head, and apologize to Vance, I would be permanently cut out of his life. He promised to disown me, to strip away my family name, and to leave me with absolutely nothing. I stared at the blinking red notification light on the screen. There was a time in my youth when those harsh words would have completely shattered me. Tonight they meant absolutely nothing. Without a single moment of hesitation, I pressed the delete button, wiping his voice from the device forever. I closed the laptop, my mind completely clear, absolutely ready for the morning. The morning sun broke through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Vertex Horizon Dynamics headquarters, illuminating a corporate atmosphere thick with unspoken anxiety. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. Whispers of a catastrophic internal audit had already bled through the cubicles, but on the executive floor, the air was eerily calm. Vance Sterling was lounging in his spacious corner office, sipping a painfully expensive artisanal coffee. He was the picture of unearned serenity. Through the glass walls, one could see him with his expensive leather shoes kicked up on his desk, scrolling casually through his phone with a self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face. He was absolutely convinced that he had brilliantly orchestrated the perfect crime. He truly believed that right at this very moment, I was cowering in my apartment, frantically trying to figure out how to grovel for his mercy. At exactly 8:30 in the morning, a notification popped up on my encrypted mobile device. It was a direct email from Vance. The subject line was left completely blank. The message itself was short, dripping with the kind of cowardly bravado only a rich man's son could muster. "Do not even think about trying to run away, Emery," the email read. "Building security has your photograph at every exit. If you are not sitting in the executive boardroom at exactly 10 o'clock, I will personally call the police and have a warrant issued for your immediate arrest. Do the smart thing and surrender." I stared at the glowing screen for 2 seconds. I did not type out a frantic defense. I did not beg for extra time. I simply hit the reply button, typed a single punctuation mark, a period, and pressed send. I wanted to let him twist in the wind, staring at his screen, trying to decipher the meaning of a solitary dot. What Vance did not know, what no one in that towering glass building knew, was that the grand finale of his criminal enterprise had already concluded exactly 4 hours ago. At 4 o'clock in the morning, under the cover of complete darkness, 3 federal tactical teams had silently descended upon the eastern harbor. There were no flashing sirens. There was no warning broadcast. Heavily armed operators completely locked down the private shipping dock in under 90 seconds. Every single member of the international smuggling ring, along with the armed mercenaries Vance had hired to facilitate the transfer, were currently sitting in holding cells at a classified federal black site. The stolen microchips were safely secured in armored government transport vehicles. The Pentagon had initiated a total suffocating media blackout. Not a single news station, not a single police scanner had caught a whisper of the raid. Vance was sitting in his ivory tower drinking his coffee, completely blind to the fact that his entire empire had already been reduced to ash. But I wanted to ensure the invisible blade twisted deep before I even stepped foot into the room. Sitting at my kitchen island one last time, I opened my military laptop and executed a final surgical digital strike. I bypassed the heavily encrypted firewalls of Vance's offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. It was the exact account where the smugglers had wired his preliminary payment of $6 million just 48 hours prior. It took me less than 3 minutes to seize administrative control of the server. I completely froze his assets, locking the stolen funds behind a labyrinth of military-grade encryption keys. But I did not stop there. I rewrote the user interface on his personal banking application. Now, whenever Vance tried to refresh his account balance to admire his treasonous wealth, the screen would only display a stark, glaring message, "System error 404. Fund not found." I closed the laptop and walked to my closet. Today was not a day for the bland, shapeless gray blazers I usually wore to blend into the corporate background. I selected a razor-sharp, custom-tailored black suit. It was a garment built for war tactical armor disguised as high fashion. I left my company identification badge on the dresser. I left my laptop behind. I walked out of my apartment carrying absolutely nothing. No defense files, no printed server logs, no frantic notes of justification. When I stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor at 5 minutes to 10, the silence was deafening. Administrative assistants kept their heads down, pretending not to look at me as I strode down the long, carpeted hallway. My posture was perfectly straight, my steps measured and completely silent. I did not feel like an employee walking to her own execution. I felt like an apex predator calmly strolling into a cage where the prey had willingly locked itself inside. As I approached the heavy oak doors of the main boardroom, my eyes caught a subtle detail in my peripheral vision. Standing casually near the emergency stairwell was a man in a gray suit, deeply engrossed in a financial newspaper. By the water cooler on the opposite end of the hall stood a woman in a beige trench coat quietly typing on her phone. To the untrained eye, they were just visiting corporate consultants. But I recognized the tactical posture, the slight bulge of concealed firearms under their jackets, and the discreet communication earpieces hidden beneath their hair. They were federal undercover agents. The perimeter was completely locked down. The trap had been flawlessly sprung. I reached out, grabbed the polished brass handle of the boardroom door, and stepped inside to end the game. The air inside the grand executive boardroom felt completely devoid of oxygen. The space was designed to intimidate, featuring dark wood paneling, towering floor-to-ceiling windows, and a massive custom-built table that stretched 20 feet across the room. Seated around this imposing structure were 12 of the most powerful shareholders and senior executives in the company. They sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces stern and unyielding. It did not feel like a standard corporate meeting. It felt exactly like a medieval inquisition, and I was the witch tied to the stake. At the absolute head of the table sat Vance. He was leaning back in his oversized leather chair, his hands steepled together in a perfect imitation of a seasoned corporate statesperson. To his immediate right sat my father, Arthur. His posture was rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles twitched under his skin. A single crisp piece of paper rested directly in the center of the table. As I walked to the opposite end and stood behind the only empty chair, the heavy silence stretched until it became almost physically painful. Vance allowed the quiet to linger, savoring what he believed was his ultimate moment of triumph. Finally, he stood up, smoothing the front of his tailored jacket. "We are gathered here this morning to address a profound tragedy." Vance began, his voice echoing loudly across the silent room. He sounded like a man giving a eulogy for a beloved pet. Vertex Horizon Dynamics has always been built on a foundation of absolute trust, unwavering loyalty, and rigorous professional ethics. Unfortunately, we have discovered a catastrophic betrayal from within our own ranks. Someone we trusted deeply, someone whose family has been intertwined with ours for decades, has severely compromised our integrity. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the faces of the board members before locking his eyes onto mine. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of sorrow. "I take absolutely no pleasure in this," Vance continued, shaking his head slowly. "But to protect the future of this corporation, we must excise the infection. Emery, your actions regarding the missing defense hardware are inexcusable. However, out of respect for your father, the board has agreed to a final act of mercy. Read the statement of apology resting on the table. Read it clearly. Confess your lapse in judgment to this council and sign your immediate resignation. If you do this, we will let you walk away with your freedom." I did not reach for the paper. I did not even look at it. I kept my eyes fixed completely on Vance, maintaining a posture of total unwavering stillness. Seeing my lack of compliance, Arthur shifted violently in his seat. The veins in his neck bulged against his white collar. He leaned forward, aiming a glare at me that was sharp enough to cut glass. "Do not be foolish," my father warned, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that carried across the polished wood. "Do not let your stubborn pride destroy you. You made a terrible, careless error. Now you must face the consequences. Adults must know how to admit their mistakes to protect the greater good. Pick up the paper and do what is right for this family." I looked at my father for a long, quiet second. There was a time when his disappointment would have crushed my spirit. Today it felt completely hollow. I turned my attention back to the young vice president. A slow, terrifyingly cold smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of surrender, nor was it a smile of desperate defense. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey step blindly into an open grave. "I have absolutely nothing to apologize for," I said, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity, shattering the heavy, suffocating tension in the room. "But since we are sharing information with the board today, I think there are a few numbers the shareholders might find deeply interesting." Vance frowned, a flicker of genuine confusion breaking through his arrogant facade. "What are you talking about?" he demanded sharply. Account number 482-917-003, I stated loudly, reciting the digits with perfect rhythmic precision, held at the Grand Cayman International Depository. A secure offshore account which, interestingly enough, received an encrypted wire transfer of exactly $6 million 48 hours ago. The smug confidence instantly vanished from Vance's face. His jaw went slack, and his eyes widened in absolute naked terror. I did not stop. I took a single step forward, leaning my weight onto the back of the chair. And perhaps the board would also be interested in longitude -71 degrees, latitude 42 degrees. The exact coordinates of a private shipping dock at the Eastern Harbor, where a heavily guarded container of proprietary defense microchips was scheduled to be loaded onto a commercial freighter bound for hostile territory. "Shut up," Vance breathed out, his voice trembling uncontrollably. All the blood drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. "You thought you were a mastermind, Vance," I continued, my voice growing colder and sharper with every single word. "But you are nothing more than a careless child playing a dangerous game. Did you really think you could commit high treason, sell classified military technology to an international smuggling syndicate, and just sweep it under the rug by blaming a data analyst?" Chaos erupted. The 12 board members began shouting over one another, slamming their hands on the table. The perfectly orchestrated meeting had instantly devolved into absolute pandemonium. Vance panicked completely. His carefully constructed professional mask shattered into a million pieces. He slammed both of his fists violently against the mahogany wood, his face contorting with desperate rage. "She is lying," he screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. "She is a desperate, psychotic liar. Security. Get security in here right now. Throw this insane woman out of the building." Arthur leaped out of his chair, completely abandoning his dignified corporate persona. The shame and fury of my public defiance pushed him entirely over the edge. He stormed around the table, his heavy footsteps thudding violently against the floor. "How dare you spew this absolute nonsense?" my father roared, raising his right hand high into the air. He was fully prepared to strike me across the face, ready to physically punish me for daring to speak against his masters. I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle to defend myself. Just as my father's hand reached the absolute peak of its arc, ready to swing downward, a deafening crash shook the entire room. The heavy reinforced oak doors of the boardroom burst open with an explosive, terrifying force. The thick wood slammed violently against the interior walls, the sound echoing like a bomb detonating inside the confined space. Everyone in the room, including my father with his hands still suspended in the air, froze completely. The heavy oak doors did not just open, they were violently breached. The deafening impact echoed through the vast executive boardroom, freezing every single billionaire in their expensive leather chairs. My father, whose hand was still suspended high in the air, slowly lowered his arm, all the color draining instantly from his face. Through the threshold stepped a man who commanded absolute, unquestionable authority. General Marcus Thorne, commander of the United States Cyber Command, strode into the room. He was dressed in his immaculate military uniform, his chest adorned with rows of glowing service ribbons and medals that caught the morning light. His face was carved from granite, his eyes sharp and entirely unforgiving. Behind him, a completely overwhelming force flooded into the corporate sanctuary. A dozen heavily armed federal tactical agents, clad in jet-black gear and reinforced vests, fanned out across the room. Their assault rifles were held at the low ready, and their sheer presence instantly suffocated any remaining arrogance in the room. The billionaires, men and women who controlled global markets, shrank back into their chairs, absolutely terrified. Vance Sterling, though clearly trembling desperately, tried to cling to his fading illusion of power. He stepped out from behind the head of the table, his voice cracking violently. "What is the meaning of this? You cannot just barge in here. This is private corporate property. I demand to know who authorized this military intrusion." General Thorne did not even blink. He marched straight to the center of the mahogany table. One of the federal agents handed him a thick, incredibly dense file. The general raised the heavy dossier and slammed it down onto the polished wood with a force that made the remaining executives flinch. "Vance Sterling," General Thorne's voice boomed, completely filling the massive room. "You are hereby placed under immediate federal arrest. The charges against you include violation of the Espionage Act, international arms trafficking conspiracy to commit high treason, and orchestrating severe direct threats to the national security of the United States." Vance physically recoiled, as if he had been struck by a heavy blow. His legs completely gave out beneath him, and he collapsed back into his leather chair. No, you have it all wrong," Vance stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "I am just a vice president. I did not do anything, the data analyst. She did it, Emery did it." The shipping dock at the Eastern Harbor was completely secured at exactly 4 o'clock this morning. General Thorne stated, his tone as cold as ice. "Your international smuggling contacts are currently in federal custody. The $6 million you received in your offshore account has been entirely seized by the government. Your pathetic charade is over." Vance began to hyperventilate. He looked toward the board members for help, but they all turned their heads away. Then the absolute greatest shock of the morning occurred. General Thorne turned his back completely on the trembling vice president. He ignored the dozen billionaires sitting in stunned silence. Instead, the highest-ranking military officer in the room walked deliberately down the length of the table. He stopped squarely in front of me. The entire room held its collective breath. General Marcus Thorne snapped his boots together, straightened his posture to perfect military attention, and raised his right hand in a crisp, flawless salute. "Reporting Lieutenant Colonel Rivera," the general declared, his voice ringing with absolute respect. "The primary target has been completely secured. The stolen military assets are safe. You have executed this deep cover mission flawlessly. Outstanding work, soldier." I did not smile. I did not boast. I simply rolled my shoulders back, instantly shedding the meek, invisible posture of a lowly corporate data analyst. I stood up perfectly straight, embodying the full authority of a military officer who had just saved her country from a catastrophic intelligence disaster. I raised my hand and returned the salute with equal precision. "Thank you, General," I replied calmly. "The perimeter is yours." The boardroom completely shattered. The collective gasp from the executives sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room at once. Vance let out a pathetic, high-pitched noise, his brain entirely unable to process the reality unfolding before him. The quiet, disposable woman he had chosen as his perfect scapegoat was a high-ranking military intelligence officer. I was the architect of his total destruction. 2 massive federal agents marched over, grabbed Vance by the shoulders, and hauled him forcefully to his feet. The sharp metallic click of heavy handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed loudly. Vance completely lost whatever remained of his mind. He thrashed weakly against the agents, crying openly, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, call my father. Arthur, do something. Please, you have to help me." Nobody moved. Nobody dared to speak a single word. Vance was dragged out of the magnificent boardroom, his desperate screams echoing down the pristine corporate hallway until the elevator doors finally swallowed him whole. While the federal agents began escorting the stunned board members out for mandatory debriefing, my father remained completely frozen in his spot. Arthur Rivera had turned to absolute stone. His entire worldview, everything he had built his life upon, had just violently collapsed into dust. For exactly 20 years he had looked at me with nothing but bitter disappointment. He had constantly belittled me, mocking my career choices, viewing me as an utter failure because I did not chase corporate wealth. He had been perfectly willing to sacrifice me to a federal prison just to protect his relationship with the Sterling family. Now he realized the daughter he had thrown away was a decorated military commander. I had single-handedly protected the nation. I had effortlessly annihilated the incredibly powerful family he had spent his entire life kissing up to. Within a matter of minutes, the massive room was completely empty save for the 2 of us. Arthur stood alone at the far end of the table. He looked small, incredibly fragile, and utterly broken. He slowly took a step toward me. His hands were violently trembling. His eyes were wide, filled with a horrifying mixture of absolute awe, profound shame, and an ocean of crushing regret. He opened his mouth, his voice breaking as he finally spoke. "Emery," he whispered, a tear slipping down his aged cheek. "I did not know. I am so sorry. Please, you have to understand, I just wanted—" I did not let him finish. I smoothly reached down and picked up my briefcase. I adjusted the lapel of my black suit. I looked at the man who had abandoned me when I needed him the most. My eyes were entirely blank, completely devoid of any anger, sadness, or affection. "Just apologize and move on, Dad," I said quietly. I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. The sound of my footsteps echoed steadily against the hardwood floor. I did not look back, leaving my father standing alone in the deafening silence, drowning in an ultimate agonizing regret that could never ever be repaired. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Haley Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.